don't know who this is for, but I need you to lean in for a second, because I feel this deep in my spirit. You didn't just stumble into this moment by accident. You didn't just click on this or walk into this room by coincidence. God brought you here. See, we serve a God who doesn't do random. He is intentional. He is strategic. And even when we don't see it, he is always working behind the scenes. You might be in a season where you're questioning, God, why am I here? Why am I in this job? Why am I in this struggle? Why am I in this waiting room? But what if I told you he brought you here on purpose for a purpose? Because before you ever showed up, before you even knew what you needed, God already made a way. He already opened the door. He already assigned the breakthrough. So don't tune out. Don't scroll past this moment, because I believe God has something to say to you today. And if you'll lean in, if you'll just open your heart, I believe he's about to show you exactly why he brought you here. Somebody say, I'm here on purpose. Have you ever had a moment in life where you looked around and thought, why am I here? Maybe it's a job you didn't expect to have, a season of waiting that feels frustrating, or a place in life that doesn't seem to make sense. But let me tell you something. You are not here by accident. God is intentional. He is strategic. He never places you anywhere without a purpose. Even when things feel random or uncertain, he is always working behind the scenes. Look at what God told the prophet Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1:05. That means before you even took your first breath, God already had a plan for you. He already knew what you would go through, what battles you would fight, and what victories you would win. Nothing about your life is a surprise to him. God's plan is bigger than your perspective. Maybe right now you feel stuck. Maybe you don't understand why certain doors haven't opened, or why certain prayers haven't been answered the way you expected. But could it be that God is positioning you for something you can't see yet? Think about Joseph in the Bible. God gave him a dream, but before he ever reached the palace, he had to go through the pit, the prison, and years of uncertainty. If Joseph had judged God's plan by his current situation, he would have thought God had forgotten about him. But every step, every hardship was a setup for something greater. That's why Proverbs 3:05-6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. You don't have to understand everything to trust that God is leading you somewhere good. God places you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes we try to move ahead of God because we think we should be somewhere else by now. But what if I told you that where you are right now, in this moment, is exactly where you're supposed to be? Moses didn't see the Red Sea part before he stepped forward in obedience. Peter didn't walk on water until he stepped out of the boat. God moves when we trust that he has already gone ahead of us. So instead of asking, why am I here? Start asking God, what are you teaching me here? Instead of wishing for a different season, start embracing the one you're in. Because God doesn't waste anything. He has a plan, he has a purpose, and if you're still breathing, that means he's not done with you yet. Somebody shout, I'm here on purpose. It's easy to feel frustrated when life doesn't go the way you expected. You pray, you believe, you step out in faith, but instead of a breakthrough, you find yourself in a waiting season. Instead of promotion, you face setbacks. Instead of open doors, you feel like every opportunity is locked shut. But what if I told you that this season you're in isn't punishment, it's preparation? God is not ignoring you. He is not withholding his promises from you. He is getting you ready for what he has already prepared. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not on the way. The delay doesn't mean denial. Sometimes God is developing something inside of you before he releases what's in front of you. Think about David. When the prophet Samuel anointed him as king, David didn't immediately step into the palace. He went back to the pasture. He went back to tending sheep. It would take years before he would finally take the throne. And in the meantime, he had to go through battles, betrayals, and seasons of obscurity. But every single challenge was preparing him for his destiny. If David had skipped the process, he wouldn't have had the character to handle the promotion. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. That means even when things don't make sense, even when it feels like you're stuck, God is working behind the scenes. He is using this season to strengthen you, refine you, and build the faith you need for the next level. Maybe you're asking God, why am I still here? Why hasn't this situation changed? But could it be that God is changing you first? Could it be that he's working on your patience, your trust, your ability to rely on him? Sometimes the very thing we think is holding us back is actually what God is using to move us forward. If you rush the process, you might step into something you're not ready for. A premature blessing can feel like a burden, but when God opens the door in his timing, no man can shut it. That's why you can't despise this season. You can't waste it complaining, comparing, or doubting. Instead, ask God, what are you trying to teach me? How can I grow in this? How can I prepare for what's next? Because when the moment comes, when God finally brings the breakthrough, you won't just step into it unprepared. You'll walk into it with confidence, knowing that the same God who led you through the waiting will be the same God who empowers you in the blessing. So don't give up. Don't get discouraged. Your preparation season is proof that God is getting ready to do something amazing in your life. Somebody shout, I'm being prepared for greater. Nobody likes pain. Nobody enjoys walking through struggles, setbacks, or seasons of suffering. But what if I told you that the pain you're feeling right now isn't wasted? What if I told you that God is using it for something greater? The enemy wants you to believe that your pain is pointless, that your struggles are random, that what you're going through is just an accident. But the devil is a liar. Because the God we serve never wastes anything, not even the hardest moments of your life. Think about Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, but before he saw them come true, he was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and locked up in prison. If anyone had a reason to doubt God's plan, it was Joseph. But in Genesis 50:20, he looked back at everything he had been through and said, what the enemy meant for evil, God turned for good. That means the very thing that was meant to destroy you is the thing God is going to use to develop you. Some of the greatest lessons you will ever learn will come from your deepest pain. Some of the greatest testimonies will be birthed from your toughest battles. Pain has a way of producing something in you that nothing else can. It makes you stronger, it increases your faith, and it deepens your dependence on God. Romans 5:03 tells us we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. That means your pain is doing something in you. It's refining you, it's shaping you into the person God has called you to be. Maybe right now you're asking God, why me? Why am I going through this? Why does it have to hurt this much? But instead of asking why me, start asking God, what are you trying to show me? Because there is something in this season that God wants to teach you. There's a strength he's developing. There's a testimony he's writing. And when you come out of this, and you will come out of this, you're going to be stronger, wiser, and more anointed than ever before. Pain doesn't mean God has abandoned you. Pain doesn't mean God has forgotten about you. Sometimes the greatest blessings come out of the hardest battles. Sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs happen after the most painful seasons. The enemy thought he could break you, but all he did was push you closer to your purpose. So don't give up. Don't quit in the middle of your pain, because on the other side of this, there is glory. On the other side of this, there is purpose. On the other side of this, you're going to see that God was working all along. Somebody shout, my pain has a purpose. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a season that didn't make sense? Like you've been faithful, you've prayed, you've obeyed, but instead of moving forward, it feels like nothing is changing? What if I told you that you're not stuck? You're being positioned. What if I told you that the very thing you think is holding you back is actually setting you up for something bigger? God never wastes a season. Even when it feels like nothing is happening, he is always working behind the scenes. Isaiah 43 verse 19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" That means even when you don't see it, God is setting things in motion. He is orchestrating details, aligning people, and preparing opportunities that you don't even know about yet. The delay is not denial, it's divine positioning. Look at Esther. She was just a young Jewish girl who found herself in a position she never expected. She didn't ask to be queen. She didn't plan to be the one who would save an entire nation, but God positioned her. When the time came for her to step up and risk everything to save her people, her cousin Mordecai reminded her, "Perhaps you were born for such a time as this." Esther 4:14. Esther didn't see it at first, but God had placed her exactly where she needed to be. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you don't understand why God has you in this job, in this city, in this waiting season. But what if this is exactly where you need to be for what God is about to do next? Sometimes the frustration you feel is just an indication that God is about to shift something. What looks like a setback is actually a setup. What feels like a detour is actually a divine direction. Joseph was positioned in a prison before he was positioned in a palace. David was positioned in a pasture before he was positioned on a throne. Sometimes God will put you in places that feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or even unfair, not because he's punishing you, but because he's preparing you. Because when the moment comes, when the opportunity arrives, you won't have to force your way into it. You'll simply step into what God has already set up for you. So instead of asking God, "Why am I here?" start declaring, "God, I trust that you are positioning me." Instead of resisting the process, embrace it. Because when God moves, it won't be small, it will be bigger than you expected. The doors he opens, the connections he brings, the way he accelerates your destiny, it will be more than you could ask, think, or imagine. You are not stuck. You are being positioned. And when the time is right, everything will make sense. Somebody shout, "God is setting me up for something bigger." It's easy to get caught up in our own plans, our own struggles, and our own desires. But what if I told you that what God is doing in your life isn't just about you? What if I told you that your assignment, the very reason God brought you here, is bigger than you think? Matthew 5:14 says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden." That means you weren't created to play small. You weren't designed to live an ordinary life. God put something inside of you that is meant to shine, to make an impact, to change lives. And the reason the enemy has been fighting you so hard is because he knows that if you ever step fully into your assignment, you will shake the kingdom of darkness. Think about Moses. When God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses tried to disqualify himself. He said, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Exodus 3:11. But what Moses didn't realize was that this wasn't just about him. This was about an entire nation. His obedience would set millions of people free. His assignment was bigger than he thought. And the same is true for you. You don't see all the people who will be blessed because you didn't give up. You don't see the lives that will be changed because you kept going when it was hard. The impact of your faithfulness reaches further than you can imagine. The way you love, the way you serve, the way you represent Christ in your workplace, in your family, in your community, it's bigger than you think. It's bigger than you think.